This is Arthur Thompson, better known as the Godfather of Glasgow. And this is the day he buried his son. 5 weeks earlier, that son was gunned down, aged 31, triggering the collapse of Glasgow's most infamous crime empire. This is a remarkable story of half a century of crime in one of Britain's most violent cities. An era when Arthur Thompson was transformed from petty crook into Glasgow's own mafia don.
On a Richter scale of 10, he was a 10, ruthless.
And it's a time when Glasgow earned a reputation for gangsters who used lethal violence to get what they wanted.
I just lunged up the way, it stuck his neck, I killed him.
It was definitely a revenge attack, and it was done in spectacular fashion.
He was hitting me and I was stabbing him, and he got the worst of it.
It's also the story of how Glasgow tried to shake off its violent past. But though the city was transformed, the cops who tried to clean up the streets found an underworld they just couldn't kill. There's more than one Glasgow. There's the Glasgow of today, business centre and tourist hotspot. There's the Glasgow of official history, dubbed the second city of empire because of its size and international importance. And then there's the dark underbelly. An image of Glasgow as a violent city took hold in the 20s and 30s. Chronic overcrowding and poverty, made worse by the Great Depression, produced a subculture of warring gangs. The press dubbed the city Scotland's Chicago, but this wasn't Al Capone-style organised crime. Not yet. Into this world emerged two men who would take the blueprint of the Glasgow hardman and turn him into a crime lord. They were Arthur Thompson and Walter Norval. Walter Norval would become Glasgow's first godfather. His life of crime started in the late 1930s.
I had to thieve to survive when I was young, because my ma had to go out and work, and if I had to get something, I had to steal it. She couldn't afford it, and that's the way I grew up. I was a thief.
Norval grew up in a tenement on the Glasgow Road as Glasgow limped through depression, then wartime austerity. Money was scarce, but Norval saw two ways to get it: thieving and fighting.
A lot of fighting men down here when I was young. They made their money off getting money off bootmakers, and they were the men then. They were the people we looked up to. We wanted to be like them, you know, grow up and be the same as them.
Throughout his teens, Norval served as apprentice to the local fighting men, running errands for them. Then, aged just 17, he took his first steps into serious crime. Norval headed into town with a gun in his coat and robbery in mind. When he spied a shop girl closing up this tobacconist's, he made his move.
And I saw the lassie pulling down the blinds in the window, so I just run across quick. And I just pulled out the gun and I said to her, right, get her there. And we robbed it. And it was so easy, because you didn't hurt anybody, you just spoke to them and they gave you the money.
Though Norval was caught and sent to Borstal, this would-be godfather had made his first big move up the criminal ladder. Meanwhile, a couple of miles away, there was another young criminal on the make. A man who would come to dominate Glasgow crime. Arthur Thompson.
When Arthur was about 16, he went into shopping areas, Duke Street, places, Springburn Road, and said to the shopkeeper, I understand that your plate glass window's going in tonight. You give me a £5, I'll prevent that. And the guy says, piss off. And that night his window went in.
From these humble beginnings, Thompson went on to charge dozens of businesses for protection. It had been done before, but Thompson was something new. He was systematic, ruthless, and always open to new ways of making money. In the early 50s, there was one particularly eye-catching crime for the ambitious young criminal: safe blowing.
A lot of skill involved in safe blowing. You've got to get the proper amount of nitroglycerin, etc. You've got to know what you're doing.
Many banks had barely changed since the 19th century, and their safes were no match for modern explosives. Thompson and his gang took full advantage. They broke into banks, blew safes, and fled with the cash. Then, in rural Bewley in 1954, Thompson got sloppy. Fleeing a bank robbery, he dropped his house keys and ended up with a 4-year jail sentence. Both Thompson and Norval saw prison early in their careers, but it only cemented their criminal reputations. Norval returned home in the late 40s after his armed robbery sentence and started putting his criminal name to use. He offered protection to the bookies, as he'd seen hard men do before him.
A man was earning maybe £5 or £6 a week. I was getting maybe about 5 or 6 times that off the bookies alone, you know.
And this was far from Norval's only income. He expanded his business to every corner of the Glasgow road. It was a small world, but he came to dominate it. He protected the bookies, sold stolen clothes to the brothels, and stolen booze to the many pubs.
It just built up, you know, built up from one thing to another. It grew and grew all the time.
By the early 60s, the former slum kid was rolling in it, enabling him to buy a holiday home for his growing family. Yet Norval's good living depended on one thing: his reputation as one of Glasgow's toughest men. It was a title that Norval needed to defend.
I only fought with people that wanted to fight with me. If they wanted to come and take your crime, you have to try and take it.
Mick Gibson was a young man trying to carve out his own criminal reputation. His method? Challenging the local big man.
He says, I heard you could fight. He says, I always wanted to try you out. I said, well, please yourself, let's do the back. So we went down the back. Of course, the fight, I got on top of him. And as I went to pull my head up, he must have his teeth in my ear. And as I heard the rip, I had a knife in my back pocket. I said, you'll not do that again. I just pulled it out and I tried to take his eyes out. I caught him below the eye and above the other eye.
Norval had lost part of his ear, but the score was unsettled. 3 weeks later, he was playing dominoes when a pal told him Gibson wanted a rematch.
He says, Gibson's up there, knife that length. He says, I'll probably kill you. I finished the dominoes and I got him, I walked out, and I was carried, you know, and I had one on me, a blade. And I went to that pub down there at that corner, I opened the door, he was standing at the bar with his pals. So I just walked over quick and I spoke to him and I said, hey, you looking for me? He turned around, I just stuck the knife right through his neck. And I stabbed him about 3 times in the chest. And he tried to get away from me now, and I'd done his 2 kidneys, stuck it in the back of his head. I just went berserk.
Gibson was horrifically injured, but though his heart stopped in the ambulance, doctors managed to save his life. As for Norval, he was convicted of attempted murder and would never return to his crime empire on the Glasgow road. The Glasgow he knew was about to be destroyed. Throughout the 60s, slums like those that produced Norval were torn down. Thousands of people were moved out of central Glasgow into new housing schemes. Here they were promised a new Glasgow, cleaner, better planned, safer. One man who appeared to embody this new, optimistic era was Arthur Thompson. By the 60s, he was the model of an ambitious, modern businessman.
Ideal client to deal with. Always very smartly dressed. I never had him swear in my life. I had many dealings with him in my office and they were all reasonable. Yeah, I found him a reasonable person.
But But Thompson's business-like appearance was a front for criminal activity. He diversified into money lending, ran illegal casinos, and became involved in legitimate businesses too, like scrapyards and pubs. In the process, he earned the nickname Bomber Thompson.
When he tried to take over a few of the kind of establishments around about Black Hill and stuff, such as a gambling club and a pub, he'd actually been refused. The owners had decided not to sell to him, so he'd blown them up. This guy was a dangerous, dangerous man.
The police needed new methods to keep tabs on serious criminals like Thompson. Employing the latest technology, they learned just how far his horizons now stretched.
He was one of the first who was subject to a telephone tap. So this telephone tap showed he was in contact with the Crays, and he actually flew down to London, took the business flight down in the morning to do some business for them. He was an enforcer, so he would either be harming somebody very badly or perhaps killing them. That was the level that Arthur Thompson worked at in these days.
Arthur Thompson was now widely feared throughout Britain's underworld. Few dared mess with him or his business interests. But in May 1966, two men argued with a bookmaker under Thompson's protection over just a few pennies. Within half an hour, both were dead. Cop Joe Jackson and his brother John witnessed the two men die from this very spot.
We drove up to this key junction here, and just as we came to it, I saw two cars passing. One was a Jaguar, the other one was a white van. I knew that the Jaguar was being driven by Arthur Thompson. The Jaguar was on the outside and it was forcing the other car in towards the pavement. The van was actually pushed off the road, hit against the railway bridge, wrapped itself around the light stanchion. I ran up towards the car, which was here, and there was two guys still in it, and they were obviously dead. There was no doubt in my mind what I'd seen was a murder, a double murder, and this was caused by Arthur Thompson. There's no doubt about that.
The two victims were James Goldie and Patrick Welsh. Killed, police believed, for simply challenging a bookmaker whom Thompson protected. Thompson was charged with culpable homicide, and Joe Jackson and brother John were now the key witnesses in a case against one of Glasgow's most feared criminals. In other words, they were now in personal danger.
I got a phone call at home from CID telling me that information had been received that Thompson intended to bomb my house and the house of my brother that night. So this was very unusual. It never happened before.
Fearing an attack, Jackson moved his wife and daughter out of their home. 3 months later, a bomb went off, but Jackson wasn't the victim. On the 22nd of August 1966, dynamite was attached beneath Arthur Thompson's car. The following day, he offered to drive his mother-in-law home. The moment he indicated to pull out, the bomb was detonated. Thompson's mother-in-law died instantly, whilst Thompson escaped virtually unscathed, physically and mentally.
If there was an effect on him, it wasn't noticed by me, or indeed by his family. I think they took the matter very well indeed.
So who had planted the bomb? The family of car crash victim Patrick Welsh were obvious suspects. And 3 of them were charged with a revenge attack. Incredibly, both cases came to Glasgow High Court at the same time. In the North Court, Thompson was a defendant, whilst in the South, he was key witness in a murder trial. Not that he was a very good witness. Even when his own mother-in-law had been killed, Thompson didn't like helping the prosecution.
Thompson certainly didn't cooperate with the police as far as giving evidence is concerned for the prosecution. He didn't help the prosecution at all. Don't ask me why, but he had his own reasons, obviously.
Without Thompson's evidence, the case collapsed and no one was convicted. As for the charges against Thompson, a witness dramatically challenged Joe Jackson's account.
He said that the person the driver was not Thompson, must have been someone else. He was a good witness, this chap, and he wasn't a criminal. It's just by Thompson's good luck, in my opinion, that this man happened to be very close to the scene of the crime and virtually cleared him.
The jury gave a verdict unique to Scottish justice. Case not proven, and Arthur Thompson walked free. It is a verdict that still rankles with Joe Jackson today.
The witnesses who were not police officers did not give proper evidence because they had been frightened. They were intimidated. I know Thompson, and as soon as the car was past me, I saw him, recognised him. It was Thompson.
By the late 60s, Glasgow had been transformed. Gleaming housing schemes had replaced many of the old slums. Yet the city's crime problem proved harder to eradicate. The city ranked amongst the world's most violent, and in 1969, a succession of shocking events reinforced the view that Glasgow spelt violence. There was Bible John, a serial killer who murdered 3 young women after nights out at a Glasgow dance hall. He would never be caught. There was the elderly Rachel Ross, beaten to death by masked burglars in front of her terrified husband. And then there was James Griffiths, a suspect in the Ross murder who went berserk when police tried to arrest him at this flat. Armed to the teeth, he fired shots at his arresting officers, then took pot shots at neighbours and passers-by. Next, Griffiths set off on a mad shooting spree across Glasgow. He drove to this pub, where he shot drinker William Hughes dead. He then made for Case Street and raced to the top of a tenement. Les Brown was one of the first cops on the scene.
And he blasted the bottom half of the door with a shotgun and just crawled through. The door's still intact, still locked. He proceeded with a rifle to fire shots out of the front into Case Street and out the back window, the rear window of the house, to a playground swing park.
Police laid siege outside, then sent in 2 brave cops with guns, Ian Smith and Malcolm Finlayson.
Went up to the top flat, and as they're standing at the door, James Griffiths appeared in the hallway, and he could see their legs. He knew there was 2 guys standing there, and as he lifted the gun to shoot them, Finlayson fired his revolver through the letterbox, and the bullet hit Griffiths in the shoulder and ricocheted straight through his heart and killed him. Good shot.
The death of James Griffiths was a defining moment in Scottish crime. It was the first time a policeman had shot and killed a suspect. The game of cops and robbers had become deadly serious. As stories of shootings and serial killers grabbed the headlines, Glasgow was witnessing a more widespread violence problem. Street fighting gangs were back. The infamous gangs of the 30s had been products of the slums, yet many of the new gangs sprang from shiny housing schemes. Perhaps modern homes were not the cure-all planners hoped for. Hugh Collins was one gang member and embodied a culture of ingrained street violence.
We always carried knives, always. If you didn't carry a knife, there was something wrong with you.
Collins was the son of an armed robber and renowned hardman, and as a teenager formed his own gang.
We became the centre of this group that just started to become the Shamrock. The gang thing started to shape up. Throughout Glasgow, in the Carlton, you had the Tongs, Maryhill, you had the Maryhill Fleet. But we were a nasty wee crew.
Throughout the 60s and 70s, Collins was in and out of prison for robbery and assault. But in a chaotically violent world, he stood out as a chaotically violent man.
There was a couple of people that had names. I've done them. Just for the slightest excuse, just I either stabbed them or slashed them and went, get to this is my pub, you know, that kind of thing. And I get hooked on danger. I became a loose cannon in a way.
Collins's behaviour began to alienate even his own gang, and they decided to teach him a lesson with a brutal ambush.
I just saw his face coming out of a doorway. He done a cross thing with me, with a razor, a butcher's cleaver, whacked me right in the jaw, got me up the back of my ear to there, and my jaw broke a bit of the teeth. I've heard all my teeth crunching.
Collins went in search of revenge. He headed to a city centre bar where his former pals were drinking. With them was Bill Mooney, a member of a rival mob who'd become friendly with the rest of the Shamrock. Though Collins only knew Mooney vaguely, in this world being in the wrong place at the wrong time could be deadly.
When I walked in, the place was jam-packed.
Collins and his ex-gang were tooled up and primed to fight each other. All they needed was a trigger.
A tumbler flew by me and I just went, this is it. And as Mooney went into his jacket, I just grabbed his arm and it just fell into my hand, the Bowie knife. And I just lunged up the way it stuck in his neck. You don't want to really kill people. You think you do, but you're horrified with what you've done. I still get bouts of guilt and I go, me, I took that guy's life, he might have had kids.
Hugh Collins was sentenced to life for the murder of Bill Mooney. In many ways, he was a throwback to the Glasgow hardmen of the 30s and a forerunner of the gangs of today, a man out to make trouble rather than money. The professional criminal of the 70s was quite different. He was out to make money. For robbers, improvements in bank safes had spelt the end of safe blowing. The result was an explosion in armed robbery.
When the safe blow disappeared, the armed robbers appeared with a double shotgun, you know. There was less chance of being caught. They just fire a shot and disappear.
By 1976, armed robberies had become an epidemic, and the police had to up their game.
That time, there was lots, and I mean lots, of bank robberies and wage robberies going on throughout the city. And I had a squad. We were the first armed response team, and we were actually touring the city every day.
In 1976, one particular armed robbery team was coming to the fore. A team which would become known as the XYY Gang. They specialised in cleverly planned hits on a range of targets, from wage deliveries to banks. Detective Graham Pearson responded to a trademark raid at the Milton Post Office.
That morning a post office van pulled in here, and as soon as he'd removed the mail sack containing the cash, they came forward with their shotguns and held him at the pavement. Having got the sack of money, they then made off at high speed with the cash.
That day, the XYY mob took 7 grand. This was far from a one-off. 17 grand was snatched from a wages delivery to hospital, 3 grand from a savings bank. This team wasn't interested in one-off spectaculars, but regular paydays.
Ordinary decent people were being subjected to extreme violence and threats with shotguns. And each week we were out and about looking for the next target.
Police trawled their informers, desperate to uncover the mastermind. Then, after nearly 3 years of raids, police started to hear one name in particular, 49-year-old Walter Norval. Norval had moved with the times. After his old world was torn down, he started again in the new housing schemes. He recruited young hardmen and turned them into a gang of armed robbers. Norval focused on planning, leaving others to get their hands dirty. To this day, he distances himself from his crimes, despite his convictions. And yet, he knows a great deal about a man he calls the boss.
The guy that planned them always went and looked at the place for days, watched when money was getting delivered, and watched when it was the quietest time to do it. And what made the getaway? Always planned the getaway, so he did. That was the boss.
Though his robbers went armed, Norval claims they took great care not to hurt people.
I always used to say to the lads, don't ever hurt anybody in these things. They're only people like yourself that's earning a living. Frighten them, make a noise. And that's what they done, just made a heavy noise, threats. That's what needed.
Norval and his gang may have seen themselves as sensitive armed robbers, but their victims thought otherwise.
They went through a dreadful time. They'd had guns pushed in their face, they'd been sworn at, they'd been assaulted, punched and kicked and pushed around and threatened. It's only a matter of good luck that nobody was killed.
Though the police suspected Norval, they lacked firm evidence, and the raids continued into autumn 1977. Then, out of the blue, one of the gang, Phil Henry, was arrested on a post office robbery, and he shocked cops by turning supergrass.
He gave a voluntary statement detailing who was involved in the gang, what they did, and as I say, gave us some evidence to back that up, physical evidence.
Henry took Pearson up to the old Kirkpatrick Hills outside Glasgow. There they recovered Norval's sawn-off shotgun and thousands of pounds. Norval's heyday with the XYY mob was coming to an end, thanks to Phil Henry.
Phil Henry was a rat. Grassed all his pals, and that was to save his own skin. Nothing but a piece of shit.
With Norval's arrest, Glasgow's epidemic of armed robberies came to an end. Norval and gang were now heading for a series of massive trials. But as so often in Glasgow, the path of justice didn't run smooth. On the eve of Norval's trial, someone dropped a homemade bomb through the skylight of the High Court.
If I could have clapped a guy in the back, I'd done it. Because I don't like courts all my life.
It's certainly the first time that I'm aware of that criminals had been as audacious as that.
No one was ever convicted of the bombing. But the trials went ahead and caused a media sensation, fueled by the decision to keep the defendants' names secret.
Accused were given nom de plumes from the alphabet, and that's why they became known as Mr X and Mr Y, and the whole trial became known as the trial of the XYY mob.
7 key players in the newly named XYY mob were convicted, and their names revealed to the public. Walter Norval's role as the aging mastermind led him to be dubbed the Godfather and receive a 14-year sentence. The police wanted a longer jail term for the years of terror, yet Norval feels his sentence was unfair.
Kill somebody, you get less, then take the money. That's the way the law is nowadays. Don't take after the rich, murder the poor, and you're all right.
Whilst Norval and others were busy with armed robberies, Arthur Thompson wasn't idle, but he had long ago moved on from high-risk crime.
Arthur was different entirely. Arthur was into business things and that in the town, you know.
He always described himself as a businessman. Nothing more than that, a businessman. Where he's coming from, I have no idea.
Arthur Thompson rarely served a prison sentence. His longest was 4 years for handling stolen goods in 1966, yet police interest in him never wavered.
I don't know how many times I was at his house when it was being searched by the police and checking that they didn't plant anything in his house.
That house would become legendary and gain the nickname the Ponderosa from the ranch in the TV western Bonanza. As for Thompson, by the start of the 80s, it was him, not Walter Norval, who was becoming known as the Godfather. The police didn't believe Thompson had stopped being a criminal. They just thought he got cleverer. In the early 80s, Thompson was on the lookout for more young guys to work for him when he heard two names, Paul Ferris and Ian Blink MacDonald. Blink had introduced Paul Ferris to crime when the pair were in their teens.
He was running at my mum's house and I kind of told him the money I was making. And I took him in one of the jewellery raids to do with, and we got a couple of £1,000 each. Then for there we could make 10,000, 20,000, all depends now.
For 2 years, Blink and Ferris went on a robbery rampage. Then in 1982, the partnership came to an abrupt end, thanks to Arthur Thompson's son, Arthur Jr.
I was supposed to meet Paul Ferris in the Proven Mill one night. I never turned up, and I saw him the next day. And he says that he'd been recruited by young Arthur. And I says, what do you mean? He says, well, he's heard good things about me.
And according to Blink, the Thompsons wanted Blink and Ferris as a duo.
I actually says, why does Thompson want us two young boys when he's supposed to have the whole of Glasgow sewn up? And he went like that, he says, no, he's always looking for new blood. I says, you're going to be a debt collector and an enforcer. And while we're doing this, I says, the Godfather of Glasgow, I says, he'll be sitting in the Ponderosa with his feet up, drinking brandy with his cigar and watching Minder.
Ferris took the job, but he was not just to be working for Arthur Thompson Sr., but his son, young Arthur. As Ferris and Thompson Jr. set out on their criminal career, one of the most tragic episodes in the history of Glasgow's underworld was about to take place. And it was all about ice cream vans. Glasgow's idealistic town planners had made a few mistakes with the new housing schemes. They became known as deserts with windows because of the lack of facilities, especially shops. Some canny ice cream van drivers started selling bread and cigarettes alongside the lollies. By the 80s, the vans were everywhere and criminals were muscling in. Lewis Scooby Rodden was one of them.
To go into the ice cream vans, that was just, you were getting cash all the time. A lot of people used to go into Glasgow city centre and steal everything and sell it in ice cream vans. A big thing in the days was cases of cigarettes. It didn't matter what area it was, everybody would buy cigarettes. You're talking about over the week, $2.5 grand, and the early 80s was big money. So you're prepared to fight anybody for it.
And big money meant big competition in some of Glasgow's poorest areas.
If I had 3 streets, you had 3 streets, my pal had 3 streets. But if anybody came from another area and tried to move into the 3 streets, that was a whole new ballgame. Huh? That was your ice cream war.
In 1983, the war became serious when a driver was stabbed in the head. In February 1984, another driver, Andrew Doyle, had his van shot at. Police set up a unit to calm things down, and he got the nickname the Serious Chimes Squad. But this was no joking matter. On the 16th of April 1984, someone set fire to the home of ice cream van driver Andrew Doyle. That night, 3 of the Doyle family died, including an 18-month-old child. 3 more family members, including Andrew Doyle, escaped, but all 3 died in hospital from smoke poisoning. These 6 deaths shocked the city. 2 men were eventually convicted of murder, only to be acquitted and freed on appeal 20 years later. Even today, the unsolved mystery continues to cast a shadow, yet these have not been the city's only trade wars.
There's wars in every walk of life, especially in Glasgow. If somebody's moving into your business, you want to say something about it.
Over the past 30 years, feuds over security, taxes, and even window cleaning have sparked violence. But all these trade wars paled in comparison with what was rapidly becoming the underworld's #1 trade: drugs. By 1983, the Glasgow region had one of the worst heroin habits in Britain. The Thompsons were keen to control a share of the trade, and this time Arthur Jr. was leading the way, though he lacked the formidable business skills of his father.
Possibly the worst thing that happened to him was the fact he was called Arthur Thompson, because he thought he would follow his father in his perhaps notoriety. But it's pretty brainless and disappointing. It must have been disappointing to his father as well.
The police started to hear about young Arthur, including Joe Jackson, now the head of Glasgow's crime squad. One deal that would become infamous involved Thompson Jr. paying 30 grand for a bottle of liquid heroin, only to be surprised by its contents.
It was a bottle which looked like clear liquid, which turned out to be clear liquid water.
Being sold a £30,000 bottle of water infuriated Thompson Jr. Paul Ferris was sent in search of revenge. He later admitted stabbing one man in his car as he waited at city centre traffic lights and stabbing another in a Glasgow pub. The result was increased police interest in Ferris and Thompson Jr.
I had received information that the police were going to set him up, and I sent for him, and he came with his father. And I said, look, I have information from a good source that the police are going to set you up very soon. If I were you, I would get out of the country and go to Spain somewhere.
Thompson Jr. ignored the advice and continued dealing heroin. Unfortunately for him, one of the men he supplied, Jonah Mackenzie, was already under police surveillance.
Information came in that a car had arrived outside this house, right? And who actually was in the car and came out of the car was young Arthur and another mate going into the house, obviously to supply Jonah with more drugs. So as soon as the officers saw that, they moved in and they were taken in there. So it was a lovely catch.
Aged 25, Arthur Thompson Jr. was sentenced to 11 years. His family's enforcer, Paul Ferris, was given 18 months for possessing an offensive weapon and drugs. By the time he was released, Ferris decided to quit being what he termed a dispensable wage slave for the Thompsons.
Young Arthur was just a fat boy that ate sweeties all the time. Paul Ferris was the son that he wanted.
When he left jail, Ferris formed his own team with two criminals named Bobby Glover and Joe Bananas Hanlon.
He more or less recruited Hanlon and Glover the same way he was recruited with young Arthur.
But Hanlon and Glover were to be short-lived partners. In the mid-80s, Glasgow was rebranding itself. Inspired by the hugely popular I Love New York campaign, Glasgow described itself as miles better. The campaign helped put Glasgow on the tourist map, but the underworld wasn't towing the party line. Gang violence was about to erupt around Arthur Thompson Sr. as his enemies queued up to get him. The first attack came as Thompson sat in an office at an East Glasgow scrapyard.
This seems crazy, but an IRA hitman was brought over from Ireland to assassinate Arthur Thompson. When he walked in, he didn't speak, he pulled out a gun. This gun just kept coming and coming and coming, and he took this gun out, pointed at Thompson, and pulled the trigger.
The gun misfired, and the hitman fled.
As he ran out of the caravan, this guy turned and started firing at him. So there was bullets flying all over the place, right? And one of them, it would appear, struck the cobbles and fired up into Arthur's groin.
Once again, Thompson refused to help the police. He claimed a malfunctioning lathe had caused his injury, and no one was ever charged. Then in 1990, reporter Stephen Wilkie was sitting outside the Ponderosa when he witnessed another brutal attack on Thompson.
I was kneeling down under my car changing a wheel. Next thing there's a screech, a thud, some cursing. I look up and try to see this souped up Ford sports car reversing over the railings there, and what I thought was just an old man trapped under the railing.
That old man was Arthur Thompson.
The car sped off, leaving Arthur Thompson completely entwined in the railings across the road, with a broken leg, cut face, broken nose, broken fingers and seriously bruised ribs. That was sort of the start of his downfall from that night onwards.
On the 17th of August 1991, Thompson Jr. was given 48 hours leave from prison to prepare for his release. He headed home to Provanmill and stopped in at the Provanmill Inn. There he appeared itching to get even on a whole host of criminals.
He was in the pub just down the road from where we are now, blatantly written out the names of people he was going to kill, showing it to folk, holding up, I'm going to shoot this, I'm going to shoot that, look at this knife I've bought. Silly man, paid the price.
That night, Thompson Jr. called in to see his dad. His father's house was at one end of the row and Thompson Jr.'s home at the other. There was an underground passage between the two, but Thompson Jr. chose to take the short walk along the road. Arthur Thompson Jr. was shot 3 times with a silenced revolver. Within an hour, he was pronounced dead.
It was almost like the end of an era when young Arthur was shot. It was a real change. It was like the young team are here now, move aside, old man. Your son was a joke, we've taken him out, come ahead.
So who killed Arthur Thompson Jr.? Not surprisingly, the underworld rumour mill went into overdrive.
Oh, the jail gossip was going about, wonder who could have done this, blah, 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 and then Paul Ferris's name was coming up all over the place.
Ferris, along with Bobby Glover, was questioned about the murder, then charged with a separate violent incident. While Ferris was kept in prison, Glover was given bail. 2 weeks later, a nervous Glover phoned journalist Stephen Wilkie the night before Thompson Jr.'s funeral.
He was basically a very, very scared man. The next time I saw Bobby Glover, which was less than 12 hours later, he was behind the rear seat of a car with a .22 round in his head and a .38 round in his chest.
On the morning of the funeral, Bobby Glover was found murdered in his car, along with Paul Ferris's other partner, Joe Bananas Hanlon. The bodies were left on the route of Thompson Jr.'s hearse. Many thought Thompson Sr. was responsible.
Arthur Thompson asserted all his authority and all his criminal power for that to happen. It was definitely a revenge attack, and it was done in spectacular fashion. 5 weeks straight after his son.
With Thompson Jr.'s body barely in the ground, armed police raided the Ponderosa for one final time. They found nothing linking Thompson Sr. to the murders of Hanlon and Glover, and the case remains unsolved. As for Thompson Jr., Paul Ferris was charged with carrying out his murder. The resultant court case was the longest in Scottish history. On the day of the verdict, the whole of Glasgow held its breath. Ferris was acquitted of all charges and promptly ran into the car of journalist Stephen Wilkie.
He said that the only reason he came with the newspaper, he knew we wouldn't shoot him. We're non-combatants was his famous phrase. He knew that if he went away with us to a hotel, he'd at least be alive at the end of that night.
Ever the survivor, Ferris is still alive today. He's now a published author with no convictions since announcing going straight in 2002. As for Thompson Sr., just 2 years later, in 1993, the Glasgow Godfather died. He'd survived a car bombing, a shooting from a hitman, and a hit-and-run attempt, but he couldn't survive a heart attack.
He'd never got over the loss of his son, because I think he was only 63 or something at the time. So I think he died with a broken heart, not a heart attack.
The Thompson era was over, and Glasgow moved on. Today's city is a world away from the place Thompson and Walter Norval grew up. Yet an underworld as entrenched as Glasgow's doesn't just disappear.
Obviously, there'll always be other guys coming out in their place. To say, will they be as identifiable as Thompson or Norval? Perhaps they've learned their lessons, perhaps they'll be quieter, but they're still there, they're still doing the same kind of work, and they still have to be caught and they have to be put in jail.
Police recently identified 170 street gangs in one city, which is a phenomenal amount, and each of them's got 20, 30, 40 members, each of who will stab you to bits in a second for no good reason other than the fact you're from the wrong area. And that hasn't changed. For a while it went away in the 80s and 90s, but now it's come right back with a vengeance. Perhaps once again because the poverty level's risen.
Over the decades, the crime business has changed, like Glasgow itself. From the protection rackets of the slums to the drugs business centred on the housing schemes. Yet Glasgow's culture of violence lingers on. The city still churns out violent men who will stop at nothing to get what they want. Or, like Arthur Thompson Jr., die trying.